Welcome back to Inside Personal Growth. This is Greg Voisin. All of you know me, and many of you know the gentleman on the other side of the screen, Steven Kotler, because he's been a regular guest on Inside Personal Growth. And I just want to acknowledge him for the good work that he continues to do. And today we're going to be speaking about his newest book, which releases on April 19th, which is Earth Day, The Devil's Dictionary. And I think most of you are going to be intrigued by what he has to say around environmentalism, empathy, how that's going to play a role. And I think when you read this book, you can take away, let me just put it this way, a new perspective about us and our relationship with Mother Earth and how we're treating her. And I applaud you for that, because man, things have gone sideways in this world, right, Steven?
Sideways is sideways is a good polite term there, Greg. Let's stick with sideways. Yeah. I like that.
It is sideways. Well, for my listeners who don't know much about Steven, it's really pretty simple. All you got to do is type in his name in Google. You're going to come up with all kinds of things. But I'm going to tell you maybe a small bit amount, because I couldn't give you everything in the accolades that he's got. He is New York Times bestselling author, an award-winning journalist, the executive director of the Flow Research Collective. Again, if you want to learn more, type Flow Research Collective in. He's one of the world's leading experts on human performance. He's the author of 9 bestsellers. The Art of Impossible was the last one he did on our show. The Future is Faster Than You Think, Stealing Fire, The Rise of Superman, Bold and Abundance. And he's been nominated for 2 Pulitzer Prizes. And last time I was on, he said, I've been nominated, but I've never gotten them. Have you gotten one yet?
No, I still haven't won.
But it's close. It's coming. It's coming. I can tell you that. A lifelong environmentalist and animal rights advocate. He's co-founder of Planet Home, a conference concert innovation accelerator focused on solving critical environmental challenges, and the co-founder of the Forest Plus Fire Collective, a network of individuals and organizations dedicated to ending catastrophic wildfires and restoring forest health in the American West. You living where you live, me living where I live, us both living in California. Well, you might be on the Nevada border there, but the reality is the wildfires have been, to say the least, a big challenge for all of us. Thank you for the work you're doing. Hopefully we can make an impact. We've certainly had prior administrations which were completely ignorant to the challenges associated with what we have to deal with here in California and across the world. Wildfires here, I mean, look at the Amazon. He's also the co-host of Flow Research Collective Radio. We'll put a link to that in the blog. It's a top 10s iTunes science podcast, frequently on television and radio. You also can check him out on Google, The Science of Maximizing Human Potential. We'll put a link to that at the TEDx Albuquerque, which is where he used to live. He doesn't live there anymore. Whenever possible, you can find him hurling himself down mountains at high speeds. I don't know how much of that is still going on, but are you still doing that, Steven?
Yeah, I have no use of my left arm today from yesterday's outing.
Okay, so you were out snowboarding, huh?
Skiing.
Yeah.
I definitely managed to hit the ground hard a couple of times. I was learning, but I was crashing.
Well, we've had some, again, unusual weather patterns here in California, and not as much precipitation as expected. And the snowpack has been less than normal, both in Mammoth Lakes, Lake Tahoe area where Steven lives. And so a challenge for us, but that's where we're going to weave this interview into. The Devil's Dictionary is a sci-fi thriller, and it's the sequel kind of to the Last Tango in Cyberspace. And many of my listeners have no clue about either of these books. So to put a context and wrap a row about it, one, how did the Devil's Dictionary come about? And can you set the story kind of in the briefest way possible, going from the Last Tango in Cyberspace to the Devil's Dictionary, which is rich with characters, rich with, you just said, gangster a minute ago, Jewish gangster. But I'd love to kind of put that together for the listening audience.
It's interesting because the core, the Devil's Dictionary itself, and I won't be giving away too much here, is an artificial intelligence that can create life from scratch. So the reason it's called the Devil's Dictionary is one of the fastest ways to drive species extinction is the introduction of new exotic species into ecosystems. Tends to drive extinction. So an AI that can create life from scratch poses a giant threat to the stability of our ecosystems. I actually had the idea, not an AI. In the beginning, like 30 years ago, I had the idea for a dictionary, like a magical dictionary that anything that was written in the dictionary appeared in reality. And that I played with this idea in a tiny little short story I wrote, maybe right when I was just out of grad school. I don't think I ever published it, and sort of parked it and went, that's a cool idea. I don't know how to deal with that, and let it alone for 20 or 30 years. And when AI started showing up, and my dear friend Andrew Hessel is in charge of the Human Genome Right Project. So everybody is familiar with the first Human Genome Project, where they read DNA. They read a human genome. The right version is an attempt to write a human genome from scratch, to literally boot up human life from scratch. And Andrew's a dear friend. I've known him for a very long time, in conjunction with Singularity University and things like that. And we started talking about sort of what CRISPR and AI and gene sequencing, those technologies will make possible really within like a 10 to 15 year time frame, which is where the book is set, right about 15 years into the future. And suddenly I realized, oh wait, I don't have to write this magical realism book about a dictionary. I can use actually real technology that'll be here in 10 to 15 years to tell the same story. And so that was sort of where the original core idea that's the center of it came from. And as you pointed out, almost everything else is the continuation of a world I created in Last Tango in Cyberspace. And this is essentially that same story picked up, further on. And I would say, I think the books function independently, very independently, especially Devil's Dictionary. I wrote it specifically so you didn't have to read the first one. I think Devil's Dictionary is better than Last Tango. I think Last Tango, I was still trying to figure out how to write the world and really put the characters together. And I think Devil's Dictionary, it really sort of snaps together. We were, we meaning myself and my publisher, St. Martin's, always sort of thought about this a little bit in the back of our minds as, is Lion Zorn like a new sort of detective hero for the future for that kind of story? Do I want to do a trilogy? Do I want to keep doing this as a series? Only because those are writing challenges I've never tried to undertake before. So they're, from a writer's perspective, they were new challenges. But the lead character is a man named Lion Zorn. He is a genetic mutant, first of his kind, born in the 21st century, so this century. And what is different from him is, and this is probably actually something that's already in our species, I've just taken it farther, is he's an empathy tracker. So he has a wildly expanded sense of empathy. He doesn't just feel for all human beings, which he does, of course, but it extends beyond the line of species. So he feels for plants, for animals, for ecosystems. And he's not the only M-Chacker. There's others who have started showing up in the world. And they end up, while the transformation itself is, when these new talents show up, difficult, right? Suddenly you're feeling empathy for things you've never felt empathy before, and can be overwhelming. But once that transfer, turns out it's in the future that I created. It's a useful skill. It's like the cool hunting of tomorrow, right? Like, because they can track cultural trends using empathy and emotion long before they arrive. They can see them start to emerge and help organizations, companies, whatsoever, get out ahead of them. And in Last Tango, Lion is brought in by an eccentric billionaire to help solve an environmental problem. And this book, it's sort of the same setup. It's the environmental issue set up in Last Tango was the development of a new psychedelic that actually creates the same cross-species empathy that M-trackers normally feel in average people. So the tension in the first book is around that particular psychedelic. In Devil's Dictionary, that psychedelic has already been released wide, and it's produced what I term the splinter, which is there are people who literally now feel empathy for all animals. They're huge animal rights advocates, and a huge portion of the globe has gone in this direction. And we'll talk about why I thought that was important in half a second. I'll come back to it. And then there's a opposition movement, right? Who don't believe empathy for animals. It's a humans first, two legs, not four counter movement. And this is the world of the Devil's Dictionary. And interestingly, I always say that this book is like 2 parts cyberpunk and 1 part climate fiction with a twist. And the twist is that both cyberpunk and climate fiction, as a general rule, are set in dystopian universes. And while the universe in both Last Tango and Devil's Dictionary is darker for sure, it's most of the climate change related disaster has been averted. Species die-off disasters have been averted. I don't make a big deal out of it in the book, but my interest was, if you're creating a world where these huge catastrophes that are, as you brought up, the world is going sideways, that's part of the sideways, have been averted. I wanted to know how it would happen. And I came to the conclusion that you would need a giant shift in consciousness and empathy. We would have to expand what psychologists call our sphere of caring, and to include plants and animals and ecosystems, so we could start to see the earth as an extension of ourselves, kind of thing. So that's the world.
Species extinction is an issue, and you were influenced by an evolutionary biologist at Santa Cruz who recently passed away. I actually was listening to one of his videos and the accolades people made. What caught me about what I listened to is he talked about it. He lived in San Diego, and he used to get abalone, and he would dig for abalone with with whatever he had. And back then abalone were this big, he said. Now, he said, they're these teeny little things that you can barely even get. So talk about something that we all in my lifetime were used to being able to get to eat. And now we're looking at extinction, if it's not already pretty close, believe it or not, to tide pools and things where you can't get these things. And you know this. So if you would, I apologize for not remembering his name right
Michael
now.
Soule.
Michael Soule. So Michael Soule had a huge influence on you. And what a wonderful man, died at 84 just recently, actually. And as I listened to that, I thought about the book. I was like, okay, here's a guy that's talking about just an extinction of one species. I think right now we have about 3,000 species that are close to extinction. I don't know what the number is,
but so the extinction rates are 1,000 times greater than normal. We're losing depends on whose numbers you want to go by, 50 to 300 species a day are what we're losing. The numbers are catastrophic. And so anyway, Soule, big hero, amazing. He's the godfather of conservation biology.
He's your guy,
He's one of them. But and I was introduced to him. If people always ask, what are your favorite books, recommend? And one of the books I always recommend is a book by a science writer named David Quammen, The Song of the Dodo. And it was actually David Quammen who introduced me to Michael Soule back in, I want to say, the 90s, when he published that book, maybe the early thousands. No, I think it was the 90s. But Soule was this conservation biologist. Well, they weren't conservation biologists at that point. He was a biologist. And he got really interested, among other things, in the fragility of island populations. So one of the things that's really well known in sort of field biology is that weird things happen on islands, and species tend to push into all available possible niches. So you get gigantism and you get dwarfism, right? It's why there's a dwarf rhinoceros running around Sumatra that's the size of a small dog, right? Those kinds of things happen on an island. The other thing he started to figure out is that species who live on islands are extremely vulnerable to extinction. And the reason is you can't, if a so-called extinction event, a volcano eruption, a tidal wave, a typhoon, any of those things strikes an island, there's not a lot of genetic diversity on the island. So if you wipe out big chunk of the 70% of the population or something like that, like a tidal wave can do to certain species on islands, inbreeding is the result. And within a couple of generations, the line itself dies out. So this has been well known for a while, 50 years, 100 years. I don't actually know. What Soule realized in the 60s and 70s was that in the modern world, you don't need an ocean for an island. You can do a 2-lane highway. And for certain species of snakes, for example, that are preyed on by birds of prey, they won't cross a highway because it's too open, too exposed, and they've got, really hardwired evolutionary coding that says don't do that. And so they're stuck in this little man-made island. And what Soule realized is this is the entire modern world. And his response to it, that has since become foundational ideas in conservation biology, is a fight against habitat fragmentation. We need mega linkages, which are basically huge tracts of unbroken wilderness connected by migration corridors, which are skinnier corridors so animals can have room to roam and that they don't get trapped on these islands in case something goes wrong. And this is now the most well-established sort of way to protect species against climate change. E.O. Wilson famously wrote a book called Half Earth, where he said if we want to fight off species extinction, we need to conserve 50% of the planet. And by the way, this has since become this is now standard environmental thinking. If you look at the United Nations plan dealing with climate change and environmental, it's 30% of the world's oceans and 20% of the world's land mass is what they're trying to protect. It's 50% of the earth. And so this is, and the US government is involved in this. Governments all over the world are now involved in this. So Soule has his thinking has become hugely influential, and here we are in the decade of conservation also. So even though he just passed away, I think he would have liked the stuff that we're going to see over the coming decade.
Most definitely. He reminded me, I've written in books, I've been asked to write chapters in books for Bucky Fuller. And I was thinking about Bucky Fuller and Bucky Fuller's predictions and, the same kind of thing as Michael Soule. Now, the story follows an empathy tracker, as you call it, an EM tracker. And I think this whole concept around empathy tracking is important. It's a theme. It's an important theme. Speak to the listeners about empathy tracking and why it's considered a syndrome.
Well, it was considered a syndrome in the way that, the way I explained it was when the genetic mutation first shows up, they call it a syndrome, much in the way that they started talking about shell shock, as a syndrome, before we actually figured out, wait a minute, this is post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, right? It's not. And what was interesting to me about empathy tracking is, if you work, and my wife and I have for years run a dog sanctuary, but if you work in the animal rescue world, the animal rights world, you meet a lot of real empaths, and especially people whose sense of empathy stretches across species lines. Now, this is not all that rare in the regular population. Roughly 10% of the population sort of has this kind of cross-species empathy built in. There's some people think the numbers go all over the place. But so I just said, well, let's take it farther. And empathy, if you know how people are feeling, and you can sort of feel cultural empathy, you could get the sense of emerging cultural emotions. You can predict, because emotions drive our behavior. So you can predict where that's going. But the reason sort of empathy is such a big deal for me is, again, environmental. And you probably know this, but the human brain, and I've written about this in most of my books, is a giant filtering mechanism, right? We take in 11 million bits of information a second. That's what our senses gather. But consciousness, what we can be aware of, is, depending on whose numbers you want to go by, roughly 2,000 outputs. So the vast majority of everything that comes in is invisible to us. And so you have to ask yourself, well, what gets through the filters? What's we see in reality? And one of the things that we don't tend to see anymore are plants, animals, and ecosystems. And the reason is quite simply, we live in box world. We live in boxes. We spend our lives staring at boxes. Sometimes we live in boxes, stare at boxes, at other boxes inside the box, and so the brain goes, okay, box world is what's really important to you. We've got to get rid of information. Let's filter out what's extraneous, and what gets removed is plants and animals and ecosystems. So if you talk to psychologists about climate change or species die-off or any of these great environmental challenges that we now face, why is this happening? A lot of them will say it's because our ability to see and perceive and care about the natural world is gone.
Yeah,
thanks to this
totally.
filtering mess, right? So how do you get it back, right? If we're going to save the planet, how do you get it back? And it turns out empathy is the secret weapon. Empathy literally is what expands the brain's, I used the term earlier, sphere of caring. What you care about, what is it? Most people care about like their tribe, their family, their spouse, their kids, maybe a couple of close friends, maybe their community if they can stretch it out far, but it's a limited scope. But it can be, empathy is how we widen it out. And as it widens out, you're basically saying, hey, I feel for this thing. This is important. Pay attention. So the brain starts letting in plants, animals, and ecosystems. So if we want to reboot ecological perception, empathy is one way to do it. And we know from flow research, we know from research into psychedelics done by Robin Hart Harris's lab at Imperial College London. We know from meditative research, one of the things that happens with these altered states of consciousness is you get nature appreciation because it expands your sphere of caring, and you end up with nature appreciation and environmental activism on the back end of it. This is sort of really well established. So it's sort of, even though this isn't a human performance book at all, it dovetails in with a lot of the work we do at the Flow Research Collective. And one of the reasons that I, thought it was really important to start the collective and train people in this stuff is, one, I want them to use peak performance to solve environmental challenges, right? I want them to, take what I'm teaching them and learn how to use flow to help make the world a better place. But also it's a backdoor into empathy and ecological perception. Getting people to kind of see and care about the environment has been
as you say, it will solve ecological challenges, and so that brings me to this part about the evolution of technology with VR. So yeah, you say we're staring in boxes. Well, yeah, I'm staring in a box right now with you through Zoom to do this call. And unfortunately, I do spend a good percentage of my day, but I do spend a lot of time outdoors, hiking and bike riding and getting in touch with nature, because I believe that balances one's world. It has to. But I do see an imbalance at this point. And I see our world speeding up in the box movement, in the virtual reality movement, into the glasses, into whatever, so that they can stay connected, but not to the true ecology of our world, let's say. You set the book into the future, but everything from augmented reality to virtual reality to mixed reality to holograms are all there. And they've been woven into the fabric of our lives. Will this, as the question says, all happen fast? We're in 2022. You're saying we could hit it by 2030.
30. Well, in that book, 30, I think 2035, I think, in Devils. Last Tango was like 2028. And I think I maybe a little bit right in there. So,
but tell us where we're going and what we,
this
as a species, I think back, pardon me, but one of my favorites was Barbara Marx Hubbard. I hadn't really realized that she'd run for vice president, and she'd spent so much time on the ecology and the world and the conscious evolution of our consciousness, right? Speak with us, if you would, about how is my listener sitting here saying, okay, I'll get the Devil's Dictionary, I'm going to read this great nonfiction book, I'm going to hear about all these characters and what's going on, but I need to take some action to, it starts with me. It starts with me. So what would you say, is this going to happen? When's it going to happen? How can we make a difference?
So those are technological questions and make a difference questions. Let's start on the tech side. I believe, I could be wrong, Greg, but I think you had me on to talk about The Future is Faster Than You Think, which is a book I wrote with Peter Diamandis about technological development and convergence over the next 10 years. So I don't know if I told you this story. When Peter and I were first talking about The Future is Faster Than You Think, which was about these converging, exponentially accelerating technologies, I couldn't figure out the fuck kind of world they were going to create, because everything was happening so quickly that we were looking at in the real world. So I literally created the world in Last Tango. One of the reasons I wrote Last Tango was to take all these technologies that are coming so quickly, put them into a world and roll it into the future, just so I could see what was coming, so I could then go back and write a nonfiction book about it. The short version of this is, exponential technology is technology that double on a periodic basis, Moore's law, right? Or anything riding on the back of Moore's law. What we're seeing now is converging exponentials. So AI is stacking on top of robotics, is stacking on top of VR, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And you're getting these overwhelming waves that are kind of washing away almost everything in their path. Ray Kurzweil, who has done sort of the best predictive math on this question, has said that over the course of the 21st century, we're going to experience 20,000 years worth of technological change. So that's like birth of agricultural to the industrial revolution twice over the next 80 years. It's 100 years worth of technological change in a decade. So you want to know what's coming? Well, think back to 1919 or 1922 at this point, and then fast forward to 2022. That much technological change over the next decade. So yes, I think a lot of this stuff is happening, and a lot of it is happening, significantly faster, and the acceleration of acceleration keeps happening, so it's speeding up more. So that, that is just the fabric of our reality right now. It's, blitzkrieg fast, as we know, and that's the first side of it. So I'll stop there, and then we can pick up.
Well, the second side is, if empathy is the solution, compassion, empathy, whatever we want to refer to it as, for all our beings on Earth, animals, plants, nature. How do we, because you just gave the dichotomy between the empathy person and the person who's not, the two-legged, you called it two-legged something.
When the first 2 legs, not 4. Yeah. Humans first movement.
Yeah. So what is it that you believe, as a writer, researcher, founder of organizations that are attempting from a philanthropic standpoint to mitigate these challenges, needs to happen?
Well, so I believe you do need a shift in consciousness. You have to, and I like to say that empathy sort of starts at home. It starts with how we treat the animals in our lives. How do we treat the plants in our lives? Like, for anybody who has pets, is the pet a family member and treated as an equal, or is the pet treated as something that's submissive? And do you have a pet, or do you have a companion animal? Is sort of the question. And I always say that, like, that's where that work starts, the work of shifting our consciousness, because you have to start with the stuff that's closest to you, because it's the easiest to sort of work with. The technology side of it that I just talked about is what sort of gives me the most hope, because we are getting, and Peter and I have been writing about this in 3 books, and we're writing a 4th book now that talks about we have the technology. We're starting to have the technology to meet these grand environmental challenges. So it is, it's really a question of, can we shift our consciousness? Because the tech is there. It's just about the will to do it. And we're seeing it now with climate change. And I think this is only the first year, but if you look at the amount of entrepreneurship, the amount of funds, and really creative, smart funds that have gotten started up around climate change, or call it, clean tech 2.0. It's an astounding, I mean, hopefully it's not too little too late, but it's an astounding amount of innovation. And I think we're starting to see similar shifts in conservation, which is what's really needed to protect.
Do you think our worldwide pandemic accelerated the technology side to make a difference? And that's question 1. And 2, as of just 4 months ago, I was vegetarian. Now I'm vegan. I will not eat dairy. I will not eat fish. I will not eat anything. But I do that from an understanding of, how much water does it take to get a cow and have him eat grass. And I think a lot of my listeners understand this. This isn't like unique to these listeners. On the other hand, many still haven't converted. I look at, we read a lot of Dr. Greger's stuff, speaking about how pandemics start, is it the ducks, whatever you want to believe, however we got this. But do you think the pandemic accelerated the desired technology? True. And also have some impact on the environment because people stopped traveling so much. We stopped putting, pollutants in the air. We stopped airplanes. You think about it all. There was a lot of impact there for a while. Are we going to just go back, Steven, and just forget all about that now that we've got our masks off?
Yeah, I think there's 3 layers to this. It's a complicated. You're asking a good question, but I think there's a 3 layers. Like, did the pandemic accelerate technology? I think it stalled certain technologies, right? Some of the technologies that required kind of more social engagement.
Right.
It's certainly, the biotechnology, artificial intelligence, quantum computing, all the things that were brought to bear on the pandemic itself. Wow, did they accelerate?
Yeah.
And right, and where you're going to see this and where it's going to matter environmentally, interestingly, is the same technologies, the same AI sort of matching technologies that sort of give us new meds. They also give us new foods. Mm-hmm. So you're going to see like a downstream impact in the food chain and health and things along those lines, and in the reinvention of food. And, so the technologies that make me really excited are things like vertical farming and cultured beef, right? So steak from stem cells. And I've said for a while, these technologies make me so excited, both, first of all, phenomenal that we can get like animals out of the food chain and, cruelty-free beef and all that stuff. And the explosion in all the cultured beefs, you know what I mean? Like, it's cultured fish and oysters and shrimp and everything you can imagine. And, by 2030, and this keeps accelerating, but cost competitive. We already have cultured beef that you can't tell the difference between it and great real steak taste-wise, and blind taste tests. Even with like 3-star Michelin chefs cooking, you can't do it. It's a price thing now. And that's about the bioreactors and the process that it takes to make this stuff. And that is coming down. So we think it's going to be cheaper than beef by 2030. So when you have a product that's cheaper than beef and it's beef, that's just a market.
It's fascinating. Right? What about printing food, 3D printing food?
That I think that's a same curve basically, because we're already seeing lots of like 3D food printers with chocolate. You know what I mean? I think it's Last Tango. I had a confectioner, a 3D confectioner, right? That was in Last Tango, and that stuff's already going on. I mean, Avi Reisenthal is a friend who runs 3D systems, is a chocolate fanatic. So he's gone into like chocolate printing and dessert printing, right? So all that stuff is coming. But all this stuff liberates, like, how do we get 30% of the land mass to give back to the animals? We need another 20% because 10% is already sort of protected. Where 30% of the planet's surface is used for cattle ranching. So we're about to see most of that go away. I think what'll be left is like boutique, super organic kind of and stuff, or cattle that's used in silvopastures, which is where you put agriculture and cattle ranching together. You actually get much better yields from agriculture when there are cows in the mix. And or large herd. We need, even if we to restore forest health to the Great Plains, you need large herbivores, bison, buffalo running across the plains, because they co-evolve together, the grasses and the bisons. And there are a lot of grasses on the plains that grow back.
Wes Jackson is doing work.
Wes's stuff is amazing.
Yeah, and my friend's doing documentaries with him, and Peter, Warren Buffett's son, is involved as well.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, Peter is involved.
That's cool.
Well, he's actually donated a lot of money to the Land Institute, but the whole perennial thing. If for my listeners, look, go back and listen. I'll put some links to a couple of podcasts I did with the guys that are working with Wes Jackson. So
perennial polycropping.
Exactly. And it's necessary for us to continue to keep soils at high levels of nutritional value, number one, and not keep plowing them under and all that kind of stuff. But, again, going back to this issue, you are addressing two questions. You did a great job on the technology side. Now, that whole thing around your Flow Collective or Flow Research Collective and the science of flow and human performance, how about we talk about human empathy? Okay. Is there an overlap in this work?
Yeah. So there's a lot of overlap. Well, there's a lot of, the overlap. One, flow increases kind of nature appreciation, but it also increases empathy. So over the past year, I'll be a little vague here, but we have trained up at the collective a number of different police forces in America. And the reason is the cops themselves want peak performance. The higher ups want more empathetic police forces, especially after everything that happened this past year, right? Obviously, this is a major issue. And I think actually even at the level of individual cops, and a lot of this has to do with the sort of the us them thinking that is at the heart of sort of cop culture and 3-letter agency culture and US military culture, right? There's an us them mentality there that is difficult, and Flow seems to bridge that gap a little bit. And so we have been, I think there's a lot of overlap there. And Greg, I've always said this, my personal interest in flow was I wanted more flow for, me and my friends, and I wanted to do research. The research puzzle is really what got me up in the morning, got me excited. When I started the training side of the company and wanting to do that, a lot of it was for environmental reasons. It was, I wanted, people want peak performance. They want to be more productive. They want to be more engaged at work. They want to be more creative. They want all this faster learning and, well-being and happiness and all this stuff you get with flow. Cool. You can have that. I want you to be more empathetic and more environmentally aware and more environmentally active. And it turns out, me training people in flow serves my needs and the environment's needs, and it also serves our customers' needs, right? You get both. And so to me, the overlap is really important.
Do you believe from an economic standpoint, though, if I was looked at Greg McKinnon and his work with minimalism and people taking a more of a minimalist lifestyle, again, our world is propagated with instant gratification, buy now, get it, add to I just noticed the other day, it's like, how much of these little plastic trinkets that people get, no matter what it is at Christmas time or whatever, is ending up in some landfill someplace, on top of the fact that we've got, gases being emitted as a result of all of these landfills. Comment on, if you would, this correlation between our consciousness and how the powers that be, I'm not going to say whether it's Facebook, Google, I'll try and name them all, are infiltrating our world, Amazon, to say bye, 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 which we know that's having an impact on the distraction of our own consciousness and being more spiritually aware people. Do you have any kind of comment about how we would break that tie to that?
Well, so
does that make sense?
yeah, I know what you're saying.
I'm trying to get it out, but I'm kind of screwing around.
You're asking some good questions. So Greg, what I think, couple things. I mean, one, like it is worth pointing out, just because we've hated on the large tech companies a lot lately, that Amazon's recent commitment, like what Amazon is now doing for climate change, for conservation, for like all these issues, they're starting to get in this game at a really big level. Microsoft too, you know what I mean? Like if you ask me who's at the cutting edge of a lot of this stuff, Microsoft, and you know what I mean? Like, because some of these companies have really, really figured some stuff out and are working hard on it. So you gotta, like, yes, we can point some fingers. You're right. But you also got to, I think, celebrate when you see some wins. But what I will say is, you're talking about sort of materialistic culture and the buy now, buy now, buy now, dopamine loops, right? And it's interesting because some of that is generational, right? Like we see less of it in Gen Z, right? So the materialism is going away. So we are in that way. I also, I don't necessarily know if you're like, we need dopamine to survive, right? Like you're not going to win. I always say that a lot of life is addiction management, right? Because we're dopamine adult driven systems, because we're goal directed systems as humans. And that produces a lot of addictive behavior, including, materialism, shopaholic stuff. So I always say that modern life is very much addiction management, and we don't like to talk about that because addiction is this dirty word, but especially with social media and the way it works, you really need to be like, you need to know what's going on. I think like the cognitive literacy that has been really important to me at the Flow Research Collective is for teaching people, like, hey, be aware of this is what dopamine feels like. This is how it interacts with your system. This is where that urge is coming from, kind of thing. Here's how you sort of protect against it. That's part of it. But what I think is really much more hopeful, because I don't know how you, like, can you get people to be better? Like you mentioned Bucky Fuller earlier, and Bucky said, don't try to change human behavior. It's been the same for so long. Go after the tools.
Change the environment.
Change the tools. Better tools lead to better people, right?
Yeah.
And so what I think is interesting is, so for example, you mentioned the Forest Fire Collective that I'm involved in.
That you're working in, yeah.
Right. There's a bunch of individuals, organizations, institutions who are trying to just restore forest health and end catastrophic wildfire in the American West. One of the big things we're working on is ways to turn soft woody biomass, basically the dead trees that are packing in our forests that we need to get out of our forests so they don't burn. Can you turn that into bioplastics? And the answer is yes. And that closes a loop. And now we have recyclable, biodegradable bioplastics that go back, like the stuff I've seen around soft woody biomass degrades in 3 months and goes back into the earth as is completely natural. So that's the stuff that excites me. We're seeing cradle to cradle manufacturing practices, circular economics. In fact, it's so funny because, every time a field gets involved in this, they have to rename shit. So business has the ESG goals, and environmentalists, we've been talking about circular economics forever, and now if you're an economist, you talk about donut economics. But they're all words for the same thing, which is like closing the loops in, so input streams from, become waste streams, become input streams. So, if you're a company and you produce a waste product, it automatically becomes somebody else's input. It gets turned into something else.
So instead, you said cradle to cradle. In the normal terminology was cradle to grave.
Cradle to grave. Cradle to cradle was William McDonough. Is that? I'm looking on my bookshelf. I think it's McDonough. Where's his damn book? But yeah, cradle to cradle is one of the new terms they're using.
Well, I get that. Look, if you look at Apple or you look at Microsoft, you just mentioned that they've really gone a long way on recycling their products. What I don't know is when I take my old iPad to Apple, where that really goes. I haven't tracked that to see.
Well, and by the way, that was another technology helping our challenges. The Internet of Things, as you know, is really being used for a lot of environmental purposes, right? And I'll give you an example. There are now ways. Part of what has to happen for the Forest Fire Collective is we have to sort of reinvent sawmills, because we need to process a lot of this wood. Sawmills are not the evil that we thought they were. We obviously need to plant a ton of trees, but we also need to bring back sawmills in a more sustainable fashion along the lines of this. And there are ways now using Internet of Things trackers that they can track a tree from the forest all the way to like your home, following the wood every step of the way.
How fascinating.
Right. So we're going to start seeing that, because I agree with you. Like, yes, I recycle my computers and all that stuff, but like, where the hell is it going? There's a lot of heavy metals there. You know what I mean? A lot of our e-waste we were shipping to Asia for years.
Right? Well, and then now they don't want it.
Right now, China said we don't want your e-waste.
We don't want your waste. But again, this is a global problem. And you come to this part about empathy, and I can kind of wrap this up. There couldn't be anything more alive for me and present than rescuing little dogs and making them part of my world. And you said Buddy Soup Project focuses on revolutionizing the quality of hospice for dogs. My wife and I were talking about this. Who's adopting those dogs that are in their last days of their life, that wants to take care of them? And I was talking to some people at the dog park, because we go there all the time. And the other thing is, I've found a new product here, just for people that are listening and have dogs, artificial turf that lasts 15 years, that has no smell, that in the state of California, which the reduction in water usage, leaving a non-toxic chemical that gets sprayed on it because the sprinklers put it out there, right? And I'm actually investing in this company because I believe in what they're doing, because you see thousands of dog parks in these planned communities coming up with people trying to maintain and keep grasses green and then walk their dogs. They got a problem. They got to have a place to go take the dogs, right? So tell us a little bit about this hospice care and the Buddy Soup Project.
So you know, Greg, that when my wife and I were in New Mexico, we ran Rancho de Chihuahua, which was a hospice care and special needs dog sanctuary, rescue sanctuary. Our work in New Mexico we were working and living in a very poor rural community with a very high instance of animal cruelty. So it was sort of a frontline effort. We did that for about 15 years. And what came out of that work was, first of all, after 15 years on the front lines, you got to get off the front lines, you'll go crazy, but was a healing protocol, an elder care protocol that is phenomenal. There's an overall movement in the vet world, in a sense, to double canine lifespan. They don't think that's too difficult, applying sort of the human standards of care to dogs. They think that's low-hanging fruit, and we tend to agree. In the work we've done, really sort of like some of it's nutrition, some of it's the way we care for our dogs, some of it's flow, so the, et cetera, et cetera. We will take dogs with late stage cancer, end stage heart failure, you know, one eye, three legs, and, you know, all that stuff. And supposedly a month left to live, right? We'll get the dog in, they'll go to a vet, and the vet will say things like, don't get too attached. They'll probably going to pass away within a couple of months, just so you know. We hear this all the time. And then the dogs live 5 to 10 more years because our protocol works so well. So what we wanted to do was also in this same time frame that I'm talking about, we had the chance, my wife more than me, to tour some other hospice care facilities that are starting to pop up. And to put it bluntly, people are just doing it wrong. They have the, like really basic stuff that to us is being missed. And some of the hospice facilities we've cared for are really high stress environments for dogs, and dogs are not going to flourish there. And so what we decided to do is to reboot. We've moved to Northern Nevada. And so we're actually, the Buddies 2 project is new. We are in the process of fundraising for it right now to build it, but we're going to build a dedicated, we're going to build a facility that I call the cohabitation project, human animal home of tomorrow today. So the artificial grass you're talking about, we want indoor pet bathrooms for older dogs, among other things, soundproof walls, things like that, shoe-proof furniture. We want that for our animals, but we're basically going to create this better facility and turn it into a YouTube channel so we can give away so you can watch what we're doing, and we can give away the healing protocol to everybody. And in the end, what we want to start to do is the third stage of it. So stage 1 is build the facility and get that done. Stage 2 is, of course, get the YouTube show going so people can start sharing this protocol. And stage 3 is create what I'm basically like Tinder that matches humans who are dying, who have dogs. It's a big problem.
Oh,
right?
Very cool.
Right. Dying humans with small dogs, like an elderly person who gets a Chihuahua as a companion animal, that's a 22-year, that Chihuahua lifespan is 20 to 25 years. So if somebody's in their 80s and they're going to be gone by the time they're 90, their dog's going to outlive them by 20 years. And so it's a huge stressor to humans in hospice care, dying humans. Oh my God, what's going to happen to my dog? And so we want to create a matching service between dying humans and adoptees who can take their dog. So
count me in for a donation to your
thank you, sir.
project. Send me an email when we hang up, because I'm a huge advocate of, I donate to a lot of things, including Danny and Ron's rescue. That guy up in Oregon with the 25-acre ranch, Asher, who's on Netflix. I'd love to see your YouTube channel. And for all my listeners, we'll put a link for this as well, because this is all about empathy, right?
Exactly.
This is the kind of thing that will shift your consciousness about how you treat the whole world. I've always said that people that adopt dogs at any stage are really true loving human beings, and they become part of the family. You were talking about that earlier. And along that line, go pick up this book, The Devil's Dictionary, for a thrilling, the characters are rich. It's a nonfiction book about really how you now become more empathetic, how we shift the world, how we make this place a better place and solve some of these. I was being nice when we set up, it's gone sideways, but to really fix some of the problems. Hey, Steven, it's always a pleasure having you on. It's a pleasure. I could talk to you for hours because every time I get on here, I learn something new or I hear something new. And that's the same thing for my listeners. I hope today, for everyone out listening, you've learned something new from Steven. He's got this great book. We'll put a link to Amazon. We'll put a link to his website. We'll put a link. Does your new nonprofit for the dog thing, do you have a link for it yet?
I will get you I'll get you an email that people that we can, so people who are, because we are fundraising, so all the help that we can get.
I will definitely make a donation to your project. I'd love to do that. And those are passion projects. That's what you and your wife love doing. So Blessings to you. Any last thoughts as we kind of wrap this thing up?
No, I just want to thank you, because this is, I don't know how many we've done of these together.
I think
but,
5 or 6.
Five or
whatever it
six.
is.
And
Yeah.
you've been usually supportive and asked, smart questions all the way through, and have had fun discussions. So thank you.
Well, you're quite welcome,
Wonderful.
and I hope that you're feeling better. So tomorrow you can go back out on the skis. Don't fall. Stay safe.